the first thing I heard was the sound of my own heartbeat on a machine. Not my daughter's voice. Not her footsteps rushing through a hospital corridor. Not even a text message notification. Just the steady, mechanical beep of a monitor telling the room I was still alive. Because apparently, that machine was doing a better job caring about me than my own child was. I'm 67 years old. I've lived through the death of my husband, 2 cross-country moves, a hip replacement, and the particular quiet grief of watching your children grow into strangers. I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought I knew what loss felt like. I didn't know anything yet. It started on a Wednesday morning in October. I remember because the leaves outside my kitchen window had just turned that deep amber color I've always loved, and I was thinking I should take a walk before the cold set in. I was making coffee, and everything felt normal. That ordinary kind of normal you never appreciate until it's gone. I'd been having some tightness in my chest for a few days. Nothing dramatic. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was the change in weather. I told myself a lot of things that morning, the way you do when you don't want to know the truth. By the time I got to church, I go every Wednesday for the morning prayer group, have for 15 years. I was feeling short of breath in a way that didn't feel like weather anymore. I sat down in the third pew from the front, right where I always sit. I remember the sunlight coming through the stained glass. I remember thinking the red panels looked especially beautiful that day, and then I don't remember anything else. I was told later that I collapsed without a sound, no cry, no warning. One moment I was sitting upright, and the next I was on the floor. 2 women from the prayer group were the ones who called 911. They stayed with me until the paramedics arrived. They held my hand. They prayed over me out loud right there on the cold stone floor of that church. I didn't know them well. We'd exchanged pleasantries for years, shared coffee after service, but I couldn't have told you their last names before that day. They knew my daughter's name, though. I must have mentioned her at some point, the way mothers do. My daughter this, my daughter that, because when the paramedics asked who to call, one of those women said her name before she even had to think about it. The doctors called her 39 times over the next 2 days. 39 times. I know that number because a nurse named Pauline, a small, tired woman with reading glasses, perpetually pushed up on her forehead, told me when I finally came around. She said it quietly, like she was ashamed on my behalf. She said they'd tried every number on file for my emergency contact, and that after the first 12 calls went to voicemail, a doctor had personally taken over dialing, thinking maybe the hospital's number was being flagged as spam. It wasn't spam. My daughter just wasn't picking up. What I woke up to 3 days later was the ceiling of a hospital room in the late afternoon light and a face I did not expect. My son-in-law's mother was sitting in the chair beside my bed. Now, I need to explain something about my son-in-law's mother because she matters to this story in ways I'm still grateful for every single day. Her name is Odalys. She goes by Odie, everyone does, and she is 71 years old, small and sharp-eyed, and always smelling faintly of gardenia lotion. She and I have known each other for 14 years, since before my daughter married her son. We have coffee together on the second Sunday of every month. We complain about our knees. We share recipes neither of us will actually make. She is, in the quiet and undramatic way of real friendship, one of the most reliable people I have ever known. She had driven 40 minutes to get to that hospital. No one called her. She heard through a mutual friend from church, got in her car, and came. When I opened my eyes and saw her, I started to cry before I even fully understood where I was. I think some part of me understood immediately what it meant that she was the one sitting there. I think some part of me had already done the math. "There she is," Odie said, and she reached over and took my hand. That was all. No drama, no performance. Just her hand on mine, warm and immediate, and the steady beep of the machine still doing its job. "Where is my daughter?" I asked. Odie looked at me for a long moment. She has a particular expression she makes when she is choosing her words. A slight press of her lips, a small stillness in her face. I have seen it over 14 years of Second Sunday coffees, and I have come to understand it means she is about to tell me something. She wishes she didn't have to. We're still trying to reach her, she said. I nodded. I looked back at the ceiling. The afternoon light was going golden through the window blinds, making long stripes across the floor. I counted them. 6 stripes. I counted them again. Still 6. How long have I been here? I asked. 3 days, Odie said. My daughter and I have always had what I would call a complicated relationship, if I'm being generous, and what I would call a painful one, if I'm being honest. She is 41 years old, successful, beautiful, and completely convinced that any difficulty in our relationship is my fault. I have spent the better part of a decade trying to figure out where I went wrong, combing through memories, apologizing for things I wasn't sure I'd done, adjusting myself to fit a version of motherhood she might find acceptable. I had sold my house 2 years prior, the house she grew up in, the house her father died in, the house I'd lived in for 33 years, because the upkeep was too much alone, and my daughter had suggested, very reasonably, that I downsize. I took her advice. I sold it for a good price and kept the money, about $90,000 in savings. I thought maybe I'd travel. I thought maybe I'd fix up wherever I landed next. Mostly, I just felt relieved to have a cushion at 65 against whatever came next. Whatever came next, it turned out, was this. My daughter knew about the money. Of course she did. I had told her, partly because I'm not good at keeping things from my children, and partly because some old instinct in me still believed that sharing good news with her would bring us closer. It didn't. What it did was plant a seed I didn't recognize as a seed at the time. On the second day after I woke up, a nurse brought in my phone, which had been with my personal belongings. It had been off the whole time I was unconscious. No one had thought to charge it, or perhaps someone had, and it had simply died again. When it powered back on, I had 47 text messages and 11 voicemails. None of them were from my daughter. They were from women at church, from neighbors, from my cousin in Phoenix who'd somehow heard, from Odie sending updates to people on my behalf. They were from my son-in-law himself, who had left 2 voicemails that I could tell he'd recorded very carefully, choosing each word. He is a careful man, my son-in-law, and I have always liked him more than I probably should admit. I scrolled all the way to the top of my messages. Then I checked my call log. My daughter had not called once. I put the phone face down on the bed tray and looked out the window for a long time. The hospital was on the west side of town, and from my window I could see a parking structure and past it, a thin strip of the mountains going purple in the late afternoon. I stared at those mountains for a while. I thought about my husband, who used to say that mountains were good for perspective. I thought he might have been right. That evening, Odie came back with her son, my son-in-law, and they brought me soup from the place down the street that I like. The one with the good chicken broth that doesn't taste like it came from a can. He set it on the tray beside me without making a big production of it, just placed it there, lifted the lid, handed me a spoon. He looked like he'd been crying, though he would never say so. "You don't have to be here," I told him. "I know," he said, and he stayed. My daughter called on the 4th day after I woke, the 7th day of my hospital stay overall. I was in the middle of a very bland lunch and not in a particularly forgiving mood. When her name came up on my screen, I felt something strange happen in my chest. Not pain, just a sudden tightness, some complicated mix of relief and anger, and something I can only describe as grief. The grief of recognizing something you didn't want to recognize. I let it ring. I don't know if I decided to. I think my body just didn't move toward the phone the way it would have a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago. My hand stayed where it was, holding a plastic spoon over a bowl of mediocre soup, and I watched her name light up the screen and then go dark. She left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it that day. Or the next. I thought about what it said. I imagined about 12 different versions of it. Some of them made me cry. Most of them made me angry. All of them, even the kindest versions I could construct in my head, came too late. What I found out later, through my son-in-law, who told me only when I specifically asked, was that my daughter had been on a vacation, a 10-day trip to the coast with her husband and their friends. She had, apparently, decided to go mostly off-grid for the trip. No work emails, minimal phone time. She had told him before she left that she needed to completely decompress and asked him not to bother her unless it was a genuine emergency. He had considered my situation a genuine emergency. She had disagreed. I sat with that for a very long time. She had known they were trying to reach her. Her phone had received the calls, the voicemails, the texts. She'd seen enough to know something had happened. And she had made a choice, deliberate and conscious, that her vacation was more important than finding out what. A week after she first called, I listened to the voicemail. She was sorry, she said. She hadn't realized how serious it was at first. By the time she understood, she felt so guilty she didn't know how to call. She said, and this is the part I've turned over and over in my mind. She said, I knew you were in good hands. She knew I was in good hands, as if that were the point. As if the point of a mother wanting her daughter when she wakes up from a medical emergency is simply about whether competent strangers are providing adequate care. I didn't call back. I came home to my apartment 11 days after the collapse. Odie had stocked my refrigerator. Her son had put a handrail in my bathroom that he'd ordered online and installed himself, quietly, without asking whether I wanted it or making me feel old for needing it. My daughter sent flowers. A very nice arrangement, expensive, with a card that said she loved me and was so relieved I was okay. I put the flowers on the kitchen table and looked at them for a day and a half. They were beautiful. They were also the first contact she'd initiated. Not a call, not a visit, not her face at the door. 11 days after her mother had nearly died. I called my attorney the following week. Now, I want to be clear about something. I am not a vindictive person. I have never been someone who operates from spite. I spent 40 years being the kind of mother who showed up to school plays and soccer games and college, move-in days and wedding venues and hospital waiting rooms whenever anyone I loved needed surgery or a difficult diagnosis or just a hand to hold at 2 in the morning. I showed up because that is what you do. That is what I believed family meant. What I did with my attorney was not revenge. It was recalibration. I had planned to leave the bulk of my savings, the $90,000 from the house, plus what little else I had, to my daughter. That had been the plan for years, the quiet assumption that sat in the background of our relationship. That eventually I would be gone and she would inherit what I had. And maybe that would be the clearest proof I had of my love. The love she seemed to have such a hard time believing in. I revised the plan. I left her the statutory minimum that made the will uncontestable in my state. I left the rest to Odie's son, my son-in-law, with a specific note that it was to be used for things that made him and his family happy. He's a good man who has never asked me for a single thing. He deserved something back. The other portion I divided between 2 organizations I've supported for years and a small scholarship fund at my local community college in my husband's name. He would have liked that. He always believed in giving people a start. My daughter found out 3 weeks later when I told her. I didn't do it in anger. I'm actually proud of how calm I was. I called her. I was the one who called. I want to be clear about that. And I told her that I had updated my will and that I wanted her to know what was in it. I told her matter-of-factly, the way you'd discuss any practical matter between adults. There was a long silence. Then she said, Mom, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious, I said. Because I didn't pick up the phone? I thought about that for a moment. The way she'd phrased it, the phone, singular, as if the 39 calls and the 11 days and the flowers in lieu of a face were all collapsed into one small failure that could be apologized away. Because of what that meant, I said, and because of what the 11 days after meant, and because of the flowers, I sent you flowers. Another silence. Odie's son, she said finally, and her voice had changed. You're leaving it to Odie's son. Among others, yes, he's not even your family. I looked out my kitchen window. The leaves were fully gone now, the trees bare and dark against a gray November sky, winter coming in fast. "He came," I said. "That's what family does." She hung up. She called back 20 minutes later, then again an hour after that. I let them both go to voicemail. Not out of cruelty. I want to be careful about that, but because I had said what I had to say, and I had said it calmly and clearly, and there was nothing left to add. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is stop explaining yourself. I'm not going to tell you that everything is fine now, because that would be a lie, and I've done enough pretending in my life to last me. My daughter and I are in an uneasy place. We speak occasionally. She is working with a therapist, which I'm genuinely glad about, because I think it's the first time in her adult life she's been asked to look at her behavior from the outside. What I will tell you is this. I feel more like myself than I have in years. There is something that happens when you stop contorting yourself to fit someone else's version of who you should be. Some kind of quiet settles in. I wake up in the morning and I have coffee, and I look at the mountains through my kitchen window, and I feel not happy, exactly, or not only happy, but something more durable than happiness, something like honesty, something like finally being in the right relationship with my own life. Odie and I still have coffee on the second Sunday of every month. Her son still checks in on me, sends me articles he thinks I'd find interesting, fixes things in my apartment when they need fixing without making it into an event. Last month, he brought his daughter over. She's 3 years old and deeply opinionated about which snacks are acceptable, and we sat in my kitchen for 2 hours doing absolutely nothing important. It was one of the best afternoons I've had in a long time. My husband used to say that you find out who people are not in the good times, but in the moments when showing up costs them something. When it's inconvenient, when there's somewhere else they could be, something easier they could be doing, and they come anyway. I know who came. I know who didn't. And I know, for the first time in longer than I can say, that I am going to be just fine.